this lecture, we'll explore data warehouse migration. A data warehouse is a place to store large amounts of data. This data is used for querying, reporting, and gaining insights for business intelligence. Now, in addition to this, predictive analytics and machine learning have become popular. This is now a requirement to extract data patterns. These results are combined to create probabilistic models which are used to predict the future. BigQuery offers access to structured data storage, processing, and analytics that's scalable, flexible, and cost-effective. It's one of the first products that were offered by the Google Cloud Platform. It was one of the 4 products, in fact, that were offered back in 2011. Now there are over 100 products and services in GCP. So what are the use cases for migration? Data pipelines that we might have seen in other lectures, they ingest a lot of raw data from various data sources. This data needs to be managed and converted and analyzed. Sometimes there's data stored in other data warehouses that may or may not be compatible. You can have scripts and procedures that manipulate and further process and analyze the data. Business applications need data or they need to interact with the data. So BigQuery data warehouse migration has a framework. This has been developed over a number of years, and there is a very comprehensive guide online at Google Docs if you want to explore this further. We'll go over this in a brief but somewhat comprehensive way that covers what's needed for the exam. So this is the main migration framework. There are a couple of steps here: 1, 2, 3A, 3B, and 3C. So the first step is to prepare and discover. This is where you prepare for your migration with the workload and the use case discovery. Then you have access and plan. There you assess and prioritize the use cases where you define the measures of success, and then you get to plan the migration. Then you have the execution. This is more of an iterative process of executing different parts that have been prioritized previously. So within the execute, you have migrate, offload, migrate full, and then verify and validate. So in the migrate offload, you migrate only the data schema and the downstream applications. And then the migrate full is when you migrate the use cases fully end to end. The verify and validate is to test to make sure that everything has worked correctly. In the initial phase, the focus is on the preparation and discovery. It's when you chat with the stakeholders and discover what the initial concerns are. The data warehouse typically supports a lot of use cases, and there are a lot of number of stakeholders from both business side and technology. So the discovery phase process consists of a couple of tasks. You need to examine the value proposition of BigQuery and compare it to other systems or the current legacy data warehouse if they're using one. Perform an initial TCO analysis, that's total cost of ownership. Establish which use cases are affected by the migration. And then finally, model the characteristics of the underlying datasets and the data pipelines you want to migrate in order to identify the different dependencies. In order to get insights into the use cases, you may want to create some sort of a questionnaire to gather information. Some of the questions that you may want to include in the questionnaire are things like, what are the objectives and what's the business value? What's the non-functional requirements? What are the different dependencies? Like, what do you know about the data pipelines feeding into other data sets? And which BI tools, reports, and dashboards are currently used? And so on and so forth, depending on the specific requirements. And then a good way to get started is to create a high-level diagram of the legacy system that's before the migration happens. So here you can see the different operational pipelines, the feedback loops, and the BI reports and dashboards that are currently being used in the system. You then want to have an access, a plan, and then make an assessment. The assess and plan phase is about the input from the prepare and discover phase. So here, these tasks include assess the current state, so develop a good understanding of where you are today, catalog and prioritize use cases. So here you break your migration process into different iterations and you catalog both the existing and new cases, and then you create a priority list. Then you need to have some sort of measures of success. So what does a successful migration look like? And usually you use some sort of KPIs, key performance indicators, ahead of the migration. You can then create a definition of what done means. So that's when you have a complex migration that involves multiple phases, then you need to have some sort of a closure of when that project specifically ends, and then you can create add-on projects or do further migrations. Number 5 is design and propose a proof of concept and a short-term state. Before you actually go with the migration, you may need to create some sort of a proof of concept, some sort of a prototype, by taking some of the sample data from the actual system and creating a small version of what the migrated product or process looks like in order to convince the business users. Number 6 is create time and cost estimates. This is more of a project management task where you have the triple constraint and you want to make sure that you set some sort of boundaries and some sort of estimates in order to, and milestones specifically, in order to measure the progress of the project. And finally, you need to identify and engage a migration partner. So migrating to a data warehouse is a complex and large task. So you need to make sure that you have a good network and you have good partners that you can consult with who have experience in doing similar tasks in the past. When migrating a large data warehouse to the cloud, it's a good idea to have some sort of an iterative process. So that way you don't go all in at once. You do a small iteration and then have some sort of a feedback loop to see what worked and what didn't work, and then you keep improving the process and you keep increasing the load. So when you're choosing to execute the iterative process, there are a few ways of how you can choose which use cases should be prioritized. So one approach is to exploit the current opportunities. So see what current opportunities could help you maximize the return on investment for a specific use case. This one is useful in order to quickly prove to the business that this is actually a good idea. So if you can quickly show, if you can pick one use case that can provide a big value quickly, then that would be a good one to start with. Another approach is to migrate the analytical workloads first. This way the OLTP workloads are prioritized. The reason for this is usually with OLAP and OLTP type workloads, these pipelines already have some sort of data pipelines already built that are used for either feeding data or creating some sort of triggers and feedback loops. So it would be easy to just plug one of those in and do a quick migration. Focus on the user experience. So this way you can find opportunities which will enhance the user experience by migrating a specific data set. So this can be something, a real-time stream of data where a back office employee who's alerted on their mobile app about a low stock, or an online customer might find a benefit of knowing their current and future spend. And these sort of ideas might seem like a gimmick, but they do provide a lot of useful value, especially if you combine them with machine learning and AutoML tables and use Google's pre-trained models. And finally, another approach is to prioritize the least risky use cases. These might be more attractive to migrate in the early phases because you know that it's going to work for sure. These might be more IT-based use cases, and you can also check with the IT team, make sure which ones are the low risk and the easiest to migrate first. So then you get to the execute phase. So here, this iteration can consist of a single use case, a few separate use cases, or a number of use cases to a single workload. There are different options, and it really depends on the specific requirements that you want to do. This image is again the same image as before, and it's again to show that the number 3 execute is an iterative phase per use case. That's why you have a 3A, 3B, and 3C, which feeds back to the beginning again. So if you further break down the execute phase, so then you have the prioritized use cases, and then you select the use cases from there, and then you have this block of 7 items here. And each of these use case or workload is either offloaded or fully migrated.
For more details, check the link in the description. Learn with Whizlabs. Success certified.